Hey folks, welcome back to this series of recaps from the 2024 National Open, which took place earlier in June in Las Vegas, Nevada. This here is my round 6 game, which I played against another junior by the name of Rishabh Chini. 2151 FIDE. I think his USCF is higher, so probably national master, or at least around that level. And yeah, this was the 6th round. Going into this one, I had an even score, 2.5 out of 5. I'd won my last game, so I was happy to get back to even, and I was hoping to continue further. Here my opponent plays e4. I went for the Sicilian, my usual choice these days, knight f3, knight c6. He goes for the open Sicilian, and here decided to play the Kalashnikov Sicilian, which I've played a couple times. Normally I play the Sveshnikov these days, but sometimes I like to bring this one out as well, as I feel like it can be a good surprise weapon and yeah, lead to similar kinds of positions anyway. So knight b5, d6, and here white plays c4. This is one of the big main lines. The other big main move is knight 1, c3 as well. But here white tries to establish a kind of Marazzi bind clamp on the center, and black has to be, I think, pretty specific with how they react to this. So g6, I go for the trendy setup here, like bishop g7, bishop e6. We'll play a6 first to kick the knight, so d6 isn't hanging, and the bishops come out, eventually knight f6. And yeah, I think black gets a very reasonable game here. I don't think white has much of an advantage if black is well prepared. We go down a pretty typical path here, so knight c3, threatening knight d5. Black has to play a6, knight a3, bishop e6, bishop e3, bishop g7, and now bishop e2. So normally I believe that white tries to play knight c2 here early on to stop knight to d4. So when my opponent played bishop e2 here, I started thinking maybe I should go knight d4 right away to take advantage of this. And I think knight d4 would be fine here. But I decided to start with knight f6, which I think is also perfectly reasonable. Castles, castles. Here white played f3, and now I just go knight d4 regardless. This was kind of my idea, that I figured this isn't going anywhere. If white plays knight c2, then fine, we transpose back into the main lines. We know the theory there, like rook c8 and so on. But if not f3, then looks like knight d4 to me was the way to play. So yeah, this pawn is definitely poisoned. If white takes right away, then among other things, I have knight g4. I think this is the simplest way. And I'm hitting the queen. The queen has to move off of this diagonal, and then queen b6 check just picks up the exchange for black at a minimum. So this should be comfortably winning. So white, of course, cannot take. And in the meantime, I maybe want to take the bishop and go rook c8 and play b5. So for example, on knight c2, then I would take on e2, queen takes e2, rook c8, hitting the pawn, and then if b3, black has b5. So very typical kind of Kalashnikov, Sveshnikov play here. And here I think black is doing well. We got the two bishops. This is a big target, and yeah, white probably has to play knight d5 and then bc4, and we can leave white with a weak pawn on c4 possibly. In any case, I think black is doing well. So king h1 was played, and getting off the diagonal, so a reasonable move. But I realized that bishop takes d4 is not really a threat here for white, so I just continue my development, rook c8. Now if white takes this one, I don't think knight g4 is working anymore, but my intention was to go knight to d5, which I think is also very, very strong, hitting the queen and the knight on c3, and after queen d2, for example, we can take here, force white to take with the pawn, and then queen a5, and yeah, I mean, white has to, I think, play knight to b1 here just to keep everything defended, and I didn't calculate too much further. I felt like black has way more than enough compensation here for the pawn. Also, I can maybe just win back the pawn right away with bishop c4. But yeah, optically, this just looked incredible for black with the two bishops, so I really didn't analyze much further. So yeah, white still can't take this one. So instead, he goes bishop to d3, which I think makes sense. Now I play knight to d7, kind of a typical maneuver here, bringing the knight to c5, and then also opening up the way for the f-pawn in many cases. Here, white goes knight to d5, and yeah, I wasn't sure how to deal with this one exactly. Like one move would be knight to c5, I think just hitting the bishop. But then I wasn't sure, like white can go maybe b4 here, knight takes d3, queen d3. And yeah, I wasn't totally sure how to evaluate this position. I think black is totally fine here. We have a lot of moves, f5, we can take on d5 as well. But yeah, not 100% clear on this one, at least during the game. White can also go bishop to b1 here, but then we probably get a similar thing if I just take on d5. And I think this was actually the way to go. I did take on d5 in the game, but after c takes d5, I ended up playing b5 here first. But I should have started with this one, knight c5, And I think, again, I wasn't totally sure about this position after b4 takes, queen takes d3. But yeah, looking at it now, I do think black is better. For example, b5, this kind of cuts off the knight from getting back in. White can take, but then the bishop gets pretty strong. So I think this would have been objectively the best thing that black could do. After knight c5, I could also drop back like bishop to b1. But then I get b5, and the difference is that if white plays b4, compared to other lines, then my knight's already on c5, so I can go knight a4 and try to get in on the queen side. So here I think black is a nice version. Like we're playing against the two bishops. We're going to play f5 soon, possibly take here, queen h4 ideas, going after the e-pawn. And yeah, I thought this was actually, well, after the game, I felt like this was the way to play. But during the game, again, I wasn't totally sure about this b4. So I start with b5. But now white goes knight c2, and very smart move, just getting the knight back into the game. Of course, he's looking to play knight to b4 here, not to trade, because then black is very happy. I think ed4, and my knight gets a lot of squares. Rather, white wants to go knight b4 and then go after c6 and a6. So I didn't want to allow this one, and I ended up trading on c2. I don't think this is actually correct. I think f5 was the way to play. And then if knight to b4, I can take on e4, for example, take on f1, and basically just underestimated black's play here. But in reality, I think, yeah, black is doing quite fine. Knight c5, things are under pressure. I have queen h4 coming, hitting the e-pawn, and then like bishop h6 ideas, trading off the dark squared bishops. The rook can come to f8. So yeah, still a very dynamic position, and I think black would have decent chances here had I gone for this one. But I decided to take on c2, simplifying the position. I go queen to a5, and here my idea is to try to play against the two bishops. Eventually I want to trade off the dark squared bishops, maybe h5, king h7, bishop h6 like this, or maybe transferring the bishop via f6, d8, and b6, like kind of another very typical plan. That was the reason why I played queen to a5, is to like make space for the bishop, but ultimately it doesn't really work out. Anyway, I go h5 here because the queen lacks space. Like if I go bishop f6, bishop d8, I definitely have to deal with like a3, b4. And the queen is just running out of squares. So I think that felt a little awkward to me. I decided to start with h5, kind of gaining space and going for this plan. But now a4, queen to b4, he takes b5. And yeah, at this point I could already take on b2, probably forcing bishop d3, trade queens, take on b5, and yeah, I felt like, okay, this would be a draw, and at this point I definitely wanted to play for more, though objectively I don't think black really has the right at this point, because we are just kind of a little bit worse here against the two bishops. So a draw, I think, objectively is definitely not a bad result here for black. But okay, I wanted to keep more chances on the board, so ab5. I don't think this is such a terrible decision. Bishop d3, knight c5. And now white does win a pawn here, but rook to b8, bishop c6. And okay, once again, if I wanted to win back this pawn, we'd get this kind of endgame. Probably white hacks on c5, dc5, and this position I thought is like very likely going to be drawn with the opposite color bishops. Maybe still I should have gone for this, because at least this is kind of playable. Like black has ideas of bishop h6, bishop d2, trying to get the pawn to c3. There are ways I was analyzing this one, white can go wrong, but yeah, once again, I was trying to keep more chances on the board. So I play king h7, looking to go for bishop h6, and my idea was that if I can actually trade off the dark square bishops, then I can definitely play with knight against the light square bishop. I have ideas like knight b3, knight to d4. One day I'll win back the b pawn, and yeah, I was hoping to play for two results. If white doesn't trade off the bishops, then I cover the c1 square, I get knight b3 again. I thought I'm kind of controlling the dark squares, and maybe I have some funny compensation. Not sure. In any case, rook c1 is played, and now once again I should really just take on b2, and here I would actually go down a pawn in the endgame, but just shows how drawish these positions are. I think the engine just gives this one as being dead drawn regardless, like rook d8, rook d2, bishop f8, and white will basically never use the extra pawn. But once again, this is not what I wanted. So I play knight to b3, but very risky, because now white gets rook c4, and rook a4, and then I got to drop back queen to d8. Just the queen has no squares here. And now rook to a7. And if anything, I mean, white has improved his position with the two bishops now very active. Rook also is quite strong. And at this point, I just 100% have to go knight to d4. And the point is, if white takes, then ed4, I'm very happy with the opposite color bishops. Down a pawn doesn't really matter. I think my bishop is actually the stronger one here. The d pawn will have to be kept under lock and key, and then b pawn is a weakness. I have queen b6 coming. The queen has a lot of squares. I really wouldn't be worried about a position like this being a pawn down. So yeah, I should have played knight d4. Instead, I went for bishop h6, following up on my idea. And this wouldn't be so bad if white, like, let's say, drops back the bishop, because I have this move in mind, knight to d2, and then rook takes b2, and then I thought maybe I'm actually getting some possible counterplay here. But instead, my opponent plays f4, and yeah, I totally underestimated this one, but it's a very nice move because he's kind of fighting back on the dark squares, and if I take a bunch of times on f4, then at the end I have a big problem on f7. So king g8, for example, queen f2, and I just didn't see how I'm defending this one. Queen g5 can be met with h4, and yeah, so f7 is just falling, and that's a huge problem for me. So after takes, bishop takes f4, black has huge issues. I think I should have played queen f6 here, and I couldn't calculate this all the way through, but apparently this actually ends up fine for black. After takes, well, I can take this one with check, but I have king g8 at the end hitting the rook, and then I'm threatening to go queen takes e4. So if rook goes back, queen e4, apparently black is fine here. I got enough counterplay against the bishop. So rook e1, white has to defend the e-file, and then we can at least trade everything off. And I think black actually has just like full compensation here. I don't know if we're winning. I mean, we're very far away from from talking about winning, but we have enough for being pawned down, and probably we can hold it at this point. And then after, in this line, take here, if white goes like rook f2, defending the queen, then knight d4 apparently is saving for black, which kind of a computer variation, but yeah, at this point, computer moves needed to be found in order to save black's position here. So I take, bishop takes, and now I think queen to b6 here was the only chance, but this one is really very difficult to find, because after bishop takes h6, king takes h6, white can take on f7, and yeah, rook takes f7, rook takes f7. I'd have to find queen to d4 here to save this, which the chess.com engine doesn't even see at first glance. It thinks white's still winning after queen f3, but the idea is to follow up with queen to d2. And yeah, again, apparently black is holding here, but optically it obviously looks horrible for the king. So really, I feel like bishop h6 was the main mistake, and then after f4 taking is another mistake, because okay, technically I have a save with queen to b6, but it's very hard to find. I think queen f6 here was actually the more normal way, or the more likely way to actually defend. After takes, I played bishop to g7, mainly anticipating the move e5 here. I thought was the opponent's idea, where I was counting on knight d4, possibly knight c6, and there I think things are actually kind of getting unclear. But I totally forgot about rook to d7. Like, I didn't realize, okay, bishop gets f4 hitting d6, and all of a sudden rook to d7 is actually a big problem if these bishops don't get traded. Maybe because I was looking at all these queen b6 lines, I'm not sure, but I played bishop g7, rook d7, and actually all of a sudden it's kind of over, because white is collecting on d6 and then winning the exchange, and there's too much material. It's the exchange, white's already going to be up 2 pawns, and white's king is so safe. I mean, black has just no hope for any counterplay here whatsoever. Knight d4 would be just one tempo. White can just move the queen and no big deal, and yeah, we're basically lost. So at this point I tried queen a5, takes on d6, knight c5, knight d4. I mean, hoping for like maybe a tempo with knight c6 and rook takes b2, but I think white has many ways to win here, like queen to d1 looks totally fine, and we're just losing the exchange and the game. My opponent played queen f2, which is also good enough, because after takes on c6, if white takes back, then okay, rook takes b2. Maybe we don't lose the exchange right away, but we're still completely losing because everything on the king side is hanging. But nevertheless, it doesn't even get that far, because after knight c6, white plays bishop takes f8, and white is just collecting more material. g7 is hanging, f7 is hanging, and so it's all over. I played rook takes f8. If knight e5, by the way, then there, I think just like bishop takes g7 is good enough. Rook takes f7 is also, yeah, totally good enough. Knight takes f7, and then queen f7 actually is not working, because rook takes f8, but white can take this one first and then f7, and it's over. So yeah, basically black has no moves. I played rook takes f8, d takes c6. Now we're down just exchange in 2 pawns. queen b5, rook takes f7, and yeah, I resign here as it's just completely over. Black has absolutely no chances, and that was it. So yeah, another unfortunate game for me with the black pieces, and like once again, like in round 4, where I also lost with black against low-rated player. You know, I was really trying hard during the game to like avoid drawish positions, trying to keep more risk on the board, keep more chances alive. I definitely pushed it way too far in this game. I should have just at any point tried to get an equal position. Probably this was really the last chance. Like bishop h6 I think is a bit egregious here for me. Knight d4, then things are still equal, and who knows, you know, I mean, anything can still happen once the game gets into the end game, into time pressure, and so on. So definitely a big lesson for me to learn from these 2 losses, where I just have to be a lot more solid with black, and yeah, not give my opponents these incredible chances. But what can you do? That's how it goes sometimes. Anyways, at this point we're on -1, 3 more rounds left to play. But yeah, got 3 more recaps coming your way. So thank you folks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next videos. Take care.